How do we identify what home means for us inside? And why does it even matter that we do so? Welcome to humanBeing, where we gather to practice being more skillfully, creatively human together. Not towards some impossible ideal of perfection, but toward greater, authentic connection. My name is Daniel Jacob Self, and I am so honored to be here with you today. As always, we're going to start with a breath. So I invite you, if it feels right to you, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, to take one moment to just take a nice, solid, slow, deep, quiet breath. Okay, here we are. So today I wanted to spend some time talking about a concept or an idea and some practices that are very closely related to last episode that I did on the locus of control and finding that inner flame and that inner drive. So this one is going to be on finding our home inside of ourselves. And so starting with, what does that even mean? It's like as I'm moving out and moving through the world, knowing that I always have somewhere safe, somewhere grounded in the depths of who I am, somewhere cozy that I can return to at any time. And that from that place, I can move out into making decisions. I can move out into understanding what feels right for me to do, what maybe does not feel right for me to do in any moment. It's a place to return to engage from, to hear our intuition from within. That to me is some of what it means to feel a sense of home inside of us. And I hope as we go along and talk more about this, I really would like to hear from you about what your sense of home means and how it develops through some of these ideas and practices as well. So as always in these pieces, I do like to start with talking a little bit about my own journey to position myself in the work, speaking to you from my own experience and from my own learning and growth, in the hopes that that is of service to you, determining for yourself what of this feels relevant, what maybe doesn't resonate as much. As I've spoken about before finding my calling in restorative and somatic facilitation and coaching and therapy, my former career was as an actor and a performer. And I remember very distinctly being told by a very prominent actor who had come in to give us some advice to our acting class. And he told us, be the actor who doesn't need anything, who's easygoing and adaptable. Don't be too inflexible. The more inflexible you are, the less hireable you'll be. And thinking back on that now, what I wish I had the wisdom or the insight to say to myself, and maybe to him, is that there is a big difference between flexibility and not having a sense of center at all. Because to be flexible requires us to flex from somewhere. By definition, we are flexing forward, we're stretching, but we have to have a place we're anchored into. Otherwise, we're not being flexible, we're being insubstantial. There's nothing there. And to not have that home and center, it means that we can't determine how far we can healthfully flex, how far we can healthfully stretch. So that alone is one of the ideas that I want to interrupt, that being flexible and adaptable, which is a hugely important part of being a healthy human and a good part of a culture and society and community. But being flexible still requires knowing where our home is to determine how far from that place we are able to healthfully go. And then he finished off by saying, until of course you're a star and then you get to do whatever you want. And that to me is such a perfect encapsulation of like, wait, okay, so we don't get to determine anything about what's right for us, what our needs are, what actually is triggering for us or upsetting for us or doesn't feel aligned for us, until we get to a certain point. So we need to be exploited until some sort of combination of luck and skill and timing and connections and privileges all sort of combine into this moment where suddenly we become uber successful, famous, a star, whatever, and then we can just do whatever we want and everyone else has to adapt to us. It's a very classic sort of hierarchical model of swapping oppression. So being in more of that oppressed place until you can hopefully get to that point of swapping over and then you get to do the oppressing. It's terrible. I want nothing to do with that kind of world. So I don't want to practice that from either side. You know, one of the things that I think has been a real disservice growing up in this particular overculture is the idea of one right way, that there is a way. And that's reflected in so many different aspects of our culture and society and internalized belief systems. And so part of coming home is coming home to the ability to find our way. which may be different from others' ways. And obviously there's a lot that more traditional cultures have access to through more of a cultural milieu. And for many of us in this society, we've lost connection to that. And so for myself, noticing what it was like growing up without more of a clear connection to culture, to ancestry, to some spiritual practices of some sort, one of the things that meant for me is that I found myself turning toward the outside to find more guidance as to who I was and how I was supposed to be. And so rather than having that be rooted in more traditional practices, more culturally informed practices, eldership of some sort, a lot of it became media, became seeking out mentors, a lot of whom did not have my best intentions at heart because they had their own wounds that they were trying to work out through their mentorship of me. And that's something that I know I've heard from a lot of others as well, that when we don't have our own sense inside, our own cultural connection, that oftentimes we look to the outside, a lot of which is telling us messages that are not always in our best interest for our wellness and for the wellness of our collective culture and planet. One of the biggest things that I found when I don't have a sense inside of myself of what feels me and what feels other, it can leave this space inside. And that old sort of maxim about nature abhors a vacuum. And so when there's a space, it tends to get filled. And so if we're not filling that space inside of us with ourselves, oftentimes something else will come to fill it. I don't mean some sort of like possession thing, though I suppose, there are things to be said about that as well. But what I'm talking about is when we don't know from where we are coming, there are a lot of other people who have a lot of vested interests in telling us from where they think we should be coming for their own reasons and from their own pain. And so a big journey in my life has been and still is making sure that I am filling up all the space within me so that when someone comes to me and they tell me something about myself, I can discern whether or not that actually feels true for me or whether I think maybe that's more them. One of the images that came to mind as I was thinking about this topic was that part in Pinocchio where there's that sort of dandified fox and that listless, hiccuping cat. And they are both coming upon Pinocchio, who in many ways doesn't have a sense of who he is. He's trying to figure out, who am I? I'm this puppet boy, but I also have these parts of me that feel real and I want to, that whole thing. So these two characters come across Pinocchio and they offer to him a sense of identity, a sense of belonging, and a lot of pleasure. And they say, all you have to do is come with us and let us tell you who you are and let us tell you how to be, and literally put you on puppet strings and then eventually transform you into a donkey or something. I haven't seen it in a while. But the point is that they say, we'll tell you who you are, and in exchange, you'll know who you are, and we'll give you lots of pleasure. But ultimately, they, of course, don't have his best interests at heart. So that's just such an archetypal little story to me that represents this idea of the importance of us finding our way home. So then that helps to inform the question we're here asking ourselves, which is, how can I cultivate and honor the beauty of flexibility without sacrificing the necessity of substantiality or rootedness, centeredness? So just taking a quick moment and inviting you to take a breath, to notice your body as you're taking all these ideas in, hearing my story, noticing what might resonate or what might not resonate. Just taking a moment to take one more breath, check in with yourself, see what it feels like to be you. Taking all the sounds around you, feeling the air on your skin, the light wherever you are, inside or outside, day or nighttime. Just taking one more breath. Okay, here we are. Okay, so that brings me to this concept that I want to talk about, which is known as the false self. And the false self was originally brought into Western thought by D.W. Winnicott in the psychology world. But of course, like most powerful concepts, it's much more ancient than that, has a lot of indigenous roots and different practices from all over the globe. But talking about the false self, the way this concept has been useful for me is understanding that I have so many parts of me that learned how they were supposed to look and act in order to receive love from the outside world. And as I went through my development and learned what those parts were, I began to assemble essentially a mask, a performative mask of how I was supposed to act, how I was supposed to be, and how I wasn't. And any parts of me that did not align with these paradigms of how I was supposed to act and supposed to be in order to receive love that I was getting from the outside culture, those got shoved into the background. They got shoved down, pushed down in the face of this performative mask of what I was determining was pleasing to those around me from whom I was attempting to get love and approval. And so this mask becomes this idea of this false self. It was defined in a book on the Enneagram, actually, called The Essential Enneagram by Beatrice Chestnut. And what Beatrice says about it is, a false self is necessary up to a point to interact safely in the world, but also the means by which we lose touch with our true self, which gets buried in the background as our false self comes to the forefront to deal with life. And just having that concept even, for me, has been really powerful to start differentiating, okay, what of that mask resonates at all with who I truly feel myself to be? And linking back to this idea from my acting training of you subjugate yourself entirely until you get famous and then you do whatever you want, you know, that false self is going to get a real boost in any sort of industry or any sort of microculture that we are a part of that accentuates it to that degree. That your job initially is to completely mask up and to only be of service to others, so that eventually you can hopefully then allow all of the suppressed needs to explode outwards and completely take over. Okay, so then, if this is what we're looking at here, the question then could become, what's the problem? If by putting up a mask and performing well, we then can have the chance to get access to privilege and power and be whoever we want and however we want, what's the problem? Well, as with most things, there is the individual level and there is the larger fractal level. On the individual level, we can look at the impacts of losing track of our authentic self or losing track of our home through this beautiful quote by Anna Lemke from this incredible book called Dopamine Nation. And she says, when our lived experience diverges from our projected image, in other words, when who we really are starts getting further and further apart from the mask, and they start being more and more misaligned, we are prone to feel detached and unreal, as fake as the false images we've created. Psychiatrists call this feeling derealization and depersonalization. It's a terrifying feeling. The antidote to the false self is the authentic self, radical honesty as a way to get there. It tethers us to our existence and makes us feel real in the world. The more there is a divergence between the mask and our authentic self, or our inner sense of home, the further apart those are, the less real we feel. And it can mean that the way we treat ourselves is not going to be the best because we don't feel the impacts of the reality of ourselves in order to treat ourselves well. But this brings us back to that distinction between flexibility and insubstantiality, because if radical honesty is one of the antidotes, being radically honest with ourselves and each other as a means of getting back in touch with our authentic selves, well, how can we do that if we don't know what our authentic selves even are? How can we know how far we're able to stretch if we don't know where we're standing to begin with? And so then scaling up to the global level, connecting it not just to our individual little selves, but to the ways that we are caring for ourselves and each other in this planet. I want to bring up Charles Eisenstein, who in his book on sacred economics says, in ecology, the principle of interdependence says that all beings depend for their survival on the web of other beings that surround them, ultimately extending out to encompass the entire planet. The extinction of any species diminishes our own wholeness, our own health, our own selves. Something of our very best is lost. And so if we think about this notion of the false self as separating us from ourselves, if we're separated from our sense of connection to ourselves, it's going to be a whole heck of a lot harder to feel our sense of connection to everything else in the world, to the planet and to other species and to other beings, to our families, to our communities, to our cities and towns. So all of these experiences of connection could be seen as these fractal expansions from that initial connection to our very selves. So when we lose that connection to ourselves, it not only leads to so much harm within ourselves, but it also leads to so much harm within our planet and our beings and our culture, which I'm pretty sure you could probably look around and have some pretty good ideas as to examples of that concept in action. So all this to say that for me, coming home to my authentic self is a necessary component of me coming home to my greater community, which is to say everyone and everything, our inherent interdependent existence, the fact that we are all connected. I can't feel that if I can't feel connection to myself, to my authentic self. So, how do we find this? How do we find this place that we're standing in from which we are hoping to be able to stretch in order to be flexible? How do we find this place of connection to our authentic self so it is not merely the false mask that we are identifying with and feeling less and less real and authentic and connected, so that we feel less and less real and authentic and connected to this planet around us and to all of the things that need to happen in this time of crisis for us to get through and show each other and the world greater care and survive and thrive. So I've created a practice. It's something that I and those I work with have found really powerful in beginning this journey of reconnecting to our authentic self, identifying our false self, the differences between the two, so we can start really practicing what it means to come home. And again, I think it dovetails and connects really nicely with the practices around locus of control. And you can find all of it by going to danieljacobself.com, and clicking on Human Being, and then finding these pieces and signing up there. So I really hope to see you in those discussions and those practices and the meetings that we have around them, so we can all continue in this human community getting closer to those sorts of connections that we need to be able to survive this coming time. Okay, so just one more time before we say goodbye, I just want to invite you to notice your body, notice your breathing, and notice how your sense of inner home and authentic self and false self and performative self, your own little sense of Pinocchio from your life experience, how any of those things have evolved or changed, any questions that have awakened, have come awake, any questions you've found about this concept of self and authentic self and home and true home that have arisen through this little video of me talking for a little bit. So, as always, I want to start this conversation. I don't want to finish it. So please do come over to danieljacobself.com, click on Human Being, and find this piece on finding home to join in the conversation, contribute your wisdom. What feels resonant? What feels like it was missing? What is this bringing up for you? Please come, please contribute, so we can start really building up this community that means so much to me, but it can't grow without you. danieljacobself.com, click on Human Being. I really look forward to seeing you there. So until then, from here, through here, to there, sending so much care.